This class is definitely going to be applicable to foraging wherever you find yourself in the world. It's not North American foraging or anything like that. A lot of the examples that I'll use will be most relevant to North American foraging, but it's going to be applicable. The principles will apply everywhere. And as we're going to learn in a second, the principles are really the important part of this class and why I designed it the way that I did. So let me give you a quick overview of how we're going to approach this class today. I'm going to bring my volume up just a little bit just to make sure. Okay. All right, I've got my volume at the max here, so I think we should be at a good level now. So the way that this class came about is a lot of the foraging classes that I had taken through my journey of foraging started off, and you kind of get a laundry list of different things. So they'll talk a little bit about safety and things like that, and then they'll say, okay, here's dandelion. Here's how to identify and use dandelion. Great. Here's clover. Here's how to identify and use clover. Here's sumac or plums, and so on and so on. And so you're just kind of like bouncing from topic to topic, from different thing to different thing. But what I was really craving was I wanted to know what makes up foraging, what builds foraging, how do I become a better forager overall, not just a better forager for dandelion or this specific plant or that specific mushroom. I want to become a better forager overall. And I kind of like to think of this as kind of like I'm an RPG character and I'm leveling up all of these characteristics to make myself a better forager. That's what this class is about. With this class, we're going to be taking a step back from the whole landscape of foraging, and we're going to be surveying it. And so I'm going to show you the individual skills and components that build up the skill of foraging, and we're going to walk through them, and I'm going to show you how you can improve at each and every single one of them. At the end of this class, I will leave a little bit of time for a Q&A, so that if you have any specific questions, I'll leave some time that we can answer those. But while we go through the class, we'll be mainly focusing on the subject matter here. And there's a bunch of stuff that I'm really excited to tell you all about. So for starters, there is another class that is going to be a similar format to this one that kind of builds on what we're learning in this class right here. So this one is called Families for Foragers. All of this is part of what I'm calling my Fundamentals of Foraging series. These are the things that I think every single forager, well, every single person really should know about if you are getting into the skill of foraging. I have a saying that I have about this class, which is, if you teach a man a plant, he will learn one. If you teach a man a family, he will learn hundreds. So with this class, you're going to really unlock some of the secrets of nature in a way, and it's going to change the way that you view plants forever. That's what it was like for me when I learned this, and I think it'll do the same for you. So we're going to spend probably about 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes to go through some of these details. This is not going to be the full set of things that we're talking about with the fundamentals of foraging. I'm going to give you the complete lay of the land. We'll get through as much of it as we can, but the full class, which I'll tell you how to access, is like over an hour and a half long, and we just don't have that much time today, but we'll get through as much as we possibly can. So here's what we're going to do. First, we are going to go over what I call the prerequisites of foraging. These are two components that you really need to have a good fundamental understanding of before you dive straight into the waters of foraging. And then this thing that you see right above me right here, this is what I call my foraging compass. So these are the components that build up the skill of foraging. We're going to talk about them in more detail, and we're really going to dive into the weeds of, specifically for this one, the identification piece and a little bit of scouting. Scouting is a big one that I think is not addressed enough when people are starting off with foraging, that I think will help you out tremendously on your foraging journey. But before we get into all of that, I want to ask the question, what is foraging, right? And really quick, while we're on the screen right here, in the comments, go ahead and type in what you think foraging is or what foraging means to you. I'm really curious to hear from all of you. I have one definition that I'll be going off of, but it's always good to, kind of think about these fundamental questions. It's kind of like, those questions of like, what is money, or something that seems simple, but when you actually think about it, they're a lot deeper than that. So put in what you think foraging means to you in the comment section. And sometimes when I ask these questions to you, there might be a little bit of pause on my end because there is a little bit of a delay between me and you. So if I pause for a second, I'm waiting for the stream that you're watching to catch up so I can see all of your responses. Okay, we have things like harvest, gathering, collecting plants, food and health, living closer to the land, survival as an aspect, means of survival. Ooh, searching for valuable resources. Searching for valuable resource. That's one of the best ones that I've seen to me so far. Knowing your land, knowing and being able to find useful things, nature's bounty. Yeah, all these things are great. I think all these things are really important components of foraging. If we're going to go to a, more well, this is literally a dictionary definition of foraging. This is what we get. This is the verb forage. And it means to search widely for food or provisions. And I actually really like this definition. It's kind of clinical in a way, but I think it really encapsulates a lot of the important aspects of foraging. So first off, we're largely talking about food, but not just food, right? We could also be talking about foraging for fiber, for example, for cordage, for making rope with. We could be talking about foraging for herbs to use for medicinal purposes. So it's not just food, it's things that are of use to us. And here's the other part of it, that beginning piece over there, to search widely. That is very important. Because what makes foraging different from farming? What makes foraging different from agriculture? If I go out and get a wild plant and then I bring it back home and I plant it in my garden, is that foraging? In a way, it kind of is, but it does feel a little bit different from what we classically think of with foraging. So to me, the thing that makes foraging like really what it is, one of its core principles, is that it's something that we do in an environment that we don't completely control. We have to go out somewhere. We have to go searching for these kinds of things. And that's one of the big things that makes foraging what it really is. But a lot of times you'll kind of, there'll be these funny arguments where people are like, which one is better, like foraging or homesteading or foraging or having a garden, intensive vegetable garden, things like that. And I think that that's the wrong question. It shouldn't be a this versus that thing, because in reality, they aren't in competition with each other. To me, foraging is one of the best complements that we can have to some of the things that we can do with homesteading or managing a garden, because you only have so much time and energy in the day, right? You only have so much. And so one thing that we can do is like with growing, high intensity vegetables, it's a lot of work, right? It takes a lot of work and effort and management and input on your part. So one thing we can do is we can team up with nature. If we start to think about wild foods like oaks with acorns, hickory trees, black walnut, American lotus, all these kinds of like nourishing wild foods, we can work with them in a way where we are teaming up with nature. We're letting nature do some of the work, and we are getting to take some of the benefits, but then also reciprocate as well. And we'll be talking about the reciprocation in a second. Because if you think about it, with gathering acorns or oak trees, you didn't have to take care of that oak tree, right? You plant an oak tree in a good spot and it's going to take care of itself. You don't really need to water it. You don't really need to look after it. And so I think that foraging offers us this amazing opportunity. Nature is reaching out its hand to us saying like, come on, we need to work together. And I think that with foraging, we can really accept that invitation from it. So the way I see it, of all of these different ways that we can get food, on this far right side we have industrial agriculture. That's the furthest that we can get away from nature. And then foraging and wildcrafting, to me, is the closest that we are in communion and harmony with nature. But these things in the middle here, ecoculture, tending the wild, that's a phrase coined by Sam Thayer, and a lot of what I'm sharing here was influenced by him and some of his work. That's where we'd be doing something like if we were managing a forest for ramp production, and that's a video that he shared about recently, or if we're getting wild foods or wild species and we are planting them near us, planting them around us, or clearing areas to make them better for it. So prescribed fire would be a great example of that. Speaking of which, I have all these seeds right here These are a bunch of Canadian wild lettuce seeds. And I would like to give away all of them because I have plenty of them. I don't need more, and I want more of you to be able to grow them. So I'll share about where you can get those from me later on in the class today. And then, of course, we have homesteading or community gardens and things like that. And that's where we'd be using things more like cultivated vegetables that have been selected over very long periods of time. We stepped a little bit further away from how we would interact with these wild plants, these wild species in the wild, but there's still a tremendous amount of benefit to nature and to us through doing that. So that's really how I see things. Now it's time. We're going to focus on the prerequisites, the things that you really need to have a solid understanding of before you jump in to foraging. There are 2 of them right here. Okay, the first one, safety. Safety, safety, safety. This one is very important. And I think that this is the big thing that keeps them back from foraging, that prevents them from rushing right on in, right? We all have this worry, or at least to me before I started foraging, and to pretty much all the people that I talk to who aren't really into foraging, they have this fear. What if I have the wrong thing? What if I have the wrong thing and I poison myself, or I make a terrible mistake? And so what I'm going to show you is how to not make that mistake, and how that danger is perhaps far more exaggerated than it might seem before you get into foraging. Okay, so I'm going to go through a set of safety rules for you right now that you should carry with you all the way through your foraging journey through the rest of your life. All right? This first rule has to do with that major fear that we just discussed. Rule number 1. This is always going to be rule number 1. You must be 100% confident and comfortable of any species that you are consuming. Confident and comfortable. I'm going to break those down in a second. So right here above me, what we see is probably the most iconic example of a poisonous plant versus a similar looking edible plant, or an edible plant and a similar looking poisonous plant, whichever way that you want to look at it. And yeah, I've taken these pictures in such a way where I made them kind of look like they could be similar. Poison hemlock and wild carrot. Wild carrot, of course, being an edible plant, and poison hemlock being a deadly plant. Not just a poisonous plant, a deadly one. There is a difference. There's plenty of things out there that are, mildly toxic, that might make your stomach upset, might make you a little bit sick. But the ones that we really need to be on the lookout for, that we really need to exercise more caution for, are deadly plants, where you could accidentally ingest a lethal amount. Poison hemlock is certainly one of them. So when we're just glancing at these, we're like, man, these look like they could be similar. I'm going to make a mistake. I don't want to do this. But when we start to get into the details of them, we realize that there are a whole lot of way to tell these 2 things apart. Let me show you just a couple of them. So we're not going to read through all these things here in detail. This is actually from my foraging knowledge base. I'll tell you guys about how you can access that later in the class. And even this is not a comprehensive look at all the different ways that you can distinguish these 2 plants. But we're looking at details like, people are very familiar with ones like the purple flower in the center on wild carrot, and poison hemlock doesn't have that. People are very familiar with the fact that wild carrot has hairs all over it, and poison hemlock is completely hairless. But then we get into these weird ones. Like, did you know that the angle of the petiole, so where the leaf meets the leaflets, on poison hemlock it's angled, and on wild carrot it's not? Very tiny detail, but it's very important. And there's way more of those. So once we start to investigate this further, we realize that they aren't as similar as we originally thought. Now, the other aspect of this is being comfortable, right? So let's go back and look at this for a second. When I started foraging, I could recognize wild carrot fairly quickly. It was, to me, a relatively easy plant to identify, but I still wasn't comfortable with it. I still had this question in the back of my mind, like, what if? What if there was a weird poison hemlock or a weird wild carrot that I could still make this mistake? And so for me, what it took was observing both of these species all throughout the times of their life, from winter all the way to the following season, to become comfortable with it, to know, like, I know what poison hemlock looks in all the stages, and I know what wild carrot looks like in all the stages. And even then, to this day, I'll eat the roots of wild carrot from time to time, but it's just there's just a little thing. There's just there's a little worry. I actually really like to eat the stems of wild carrot more, the tender stems or the tender shoots. They're quite good. And why I feel more comfortable with that is because the hairs are directly on the thing that I'm eating. But with the roots, it's like I have to remove the part of the plant that I would use to more easily identify it. So all that is to say, there isn't a race, and there's not any points you get for like eating more things than someone else, right? Take things at your own pace, go slowly, and wait till you're fully comfortable. Because there are actually stories. I know people that kind of like, they were confident in the identification, but they weren't fully comfortable yet. And you really can trick yourself into thinking that you've poisoned yourself, even though you haven't, like with a psychosomatic reaction. So I don't want that to happen to you. I don't want that to happen to anyone, which is why you should be completely comfortable with what you're eating all the time. Okay, let's move on to safety rule number 2. Know the dangerous plants and mushrooms in your area, right? We combine this with safety rule number 1. We always want to be sure of exactly what we're eating, but it is important and it is good to have a general idea of what the extra super duper lethal deadly plants and mushrooms are around you. So 2 around me, water hemlock, which is a native deadly carrot plant. Poison hemlock is a non-native one in North America. And then destroying angel, Amanita bisporigera, or bisporigera. And if I see a bright white mushroom in my area, then I know to, not mess around with it. Not that I ever would be messing around with mushrooms or anything like that. But just exercise a little bit of additional caution. But one thing that I want to mention while we're here on this page, people have this idea that somehow mushrooms are like uniquely dangerous, and that isn't true. There are poisonous mushrooms, there's deadly mushrooms, there's edible mushrooms, there are edible plants, there's poisonous plants, and there are deadly plants. Just because something is a plant or a mushroom doesn't automatically make it a little bit safer or less safe than the other one. In fact, I would argue that foraging for mushrooms in many ways is safer than foraging for plants. As far as we are aware, there is not a mushroom that is dangerous to handle, to touch, right? This destroying angel right here, I've handled it many times, never had any issue whatsoever. Same thing with the water hemlock. You can handle it. In my experience, I've handled it many times without issue. I don't recommend that you do this. That's not a recommendation. But there are plants out there that even touching them can be dangerous. Poison ivy would be the most iconic example of that. Poison sumac is another one. And then there are other members of the carrot family like giant hogweed that can cause burns and photosensitivity on your skin. And we don't see that in the mushroom kingdom. So, you can touch and handle any mushroom that you find without issue. The same isn't true for plants. So a lot of times, in many ways, foraging for mushrooms, again, if you're following all the other rules, can be safer than foraging for plants. All right. Safety rule number 3. I have to say this all the time with the videos that I make. Know the proper parts and preparation of what you are working with. So here's the big thing. Edible does not mean edible raw, nor does it mean edible in all its parts, okay? If I tell you that potatoes are edible, 1, I'm not telling you to go and eat raw potatoes. That would probably not be very good for you. 2, I'm not telling you to eat potato greens or potato berries. I'm talking about the tuber of potatoes. And the same thing is true for wild plants as well. It's important to have a proper context for this if you are getting into a plant that is new to you. So perhaps one of the more popular examples of this is pokeweed. I just did a video about this here that I'm very excited about because I got to share about these things right here, the shoots of pokeweed, which I think are one of the most underrated wild vegetables in the world. But we don't eat them raw, okay? We don't eat them raw. They have to be cooked, usually in boiling water before you prepare them in some other way. The leaves usually with changes of water. And when I tell you that you eat the shoots raw, I'm not telling you to, when I tell you eat the shoots prepared, I'm not telling you to eat the root prepared in any way, and I'm not telling you to eat the berries either. Now, there are medicinal uses for these kinds of things, but in the context of eating these as a food, there's not a lot of traditional uses to support those interactions with the plant. So we want to make sure that we're using the right plant parts in the right way, in the right context. This is very, very important. Alrighty, safety rule number 4. This one is an obvious one. Avoid foraging from areas with probable herbicide or pesticide use. Now, another thing that I'll say here is that I think that there is a greater fear of herbicide and pesticide application than exists in reality. And that's not to say that we don't have a problem with the amount of pesticides and herbicides that we're spraying and putting out in the environment. That's definitely true as well. But I think people have an idea that, companies are just going around and spraying herbicide and pesticide for the fun of it. And here's the thing. Let's think of like a power company, for example. These are oftentimes for-profit companies, and they are trying to keep their cost as low as they possibly can. I'm sure people in the Gulf can talk about testament to that, where sometimes they don't do as much due diligence as they should with preparing for things because they're trying to keep costs low. So they aren't going to run around spraying herbicide and pesticide willy-nilly because that's costing them money. It's costing them time and having workers to go out and do that. So in a lot of cases, they aren't spraying them as much as you might think. Now, that isn't true for like some non-commercial areas. Like, people will spray their lawn like crazy to have a nice, perfect manicured lawn, and they don't mind spending money on that at all. And if you're around agricultural activity, of course, there's going to be a lot of spraying. But you want to look out for some obvious signs. So right here, what we're seeing, very obvious sign of spraying. We see green right here. We see herbaceous perennial plants like dandelions growing. And then right to the left of it, we see brown, dead in a complete, nearly perfect line. That is an obvious sign of pesticide or of herbicide use. I would not forage these dandelions right here. I certainly wouldn't be foraging from anything over here either. And I'd probably, keep my distance from anything that was around it as well. So, understand where these things are happening and be on the lookout for it. Alrighty, safety rule number 5. Another very important one. For everything. I have too many examples of this. Sample a new species in small amounts before consuming greater quantities. Okay? Here's an example. Honey mushroom. Honey mushrooms are edible. If they're cooked, all mushrooms should be cooked. However, some people experience extreme, we'll call it gastrointestinal distress from eating amounts of honey mushroom, maybe large amounts. I am one of them, and I discovered this because I was testing it out. I had a small amount, I was fine. I had a little bit more, I was fine. And so the next evening, I had a whole lot. And the next morning, I was not fine. I was very sick from it. And it was not good. So, always try small amounts first and, be extra cautious if you know that there are these interactions that people have. So you'll hear about this from time to time. There's these random wild foods that cause some people nausea and others don't. Elderberry is an example of that. And what's another one that I was just learning about? Passiflora. Passion vine. Some people experience nausea from having passion vine. So have small amounts before. See if you're one of those people before having more of it. Another big one that I just shared a video about is mimosa tree or albizia. So this is something that I don't think is talked about enough, but some people experience an acute acrid burning sensation in their mouth and throat from consuming mimosa. I was trying to eat mimosa today. I was doing more testing with it. And even just eating the leaves, there are some traditional uses of eating those, still produces that sensation in my mouth. Every single form of mimosa does that to me, but it certainly does not do that to everyone. So, you have to figure out what's happening for you. Okay, a relatively, no, I won't call it a relatively new thing, but certainly an important thing in this day and age. Do your own research, okay? You hear me telling you about this amazing thing, even if it's me, I think you should confirm these things that people are talking about from multiple sources. And so here are a few that I utilize myself. ChatGPT with a grain of salt, but it's great for getting a broad idea of what I might be able to find about something. But I'll be using resources like Native American ethnobotany, random Google searches on blogs, Google Scholar for scientific articles, and then, of course, Sam Thayer's new field guide, plug for that one right here, which is the single best foraging field guide, foraging book, if you are in the Midwest or Eastern North America. Big plug for all of the work that he does. All of his books are fantastic. So you also need to be able to properly scrutinize your sources. No one requires any credentials, anything whatsoever, to post on the internet. You can have a blog by the end of this class, a new one, where you can post whatever you want that doesn't have to be vetted by anyone. So we really need to make sure that we are cross-referencing from different multiple sources, and we're kind of like exercising some critical thinking of like, who is this person and what are they claiming, and does it feel right? Does it seem to make sense? Even books these days doesn't mean that something is correct. This was a book that I did a big debunk of. It's written entirely by AI, whole thing, and it is filled with dangerously incorrect information. So, please be on the lookout for this kind of thing. I don't know what the state of these is they're all over Amazon right now, unfortunately. And you can see that they're really trying to target some of the titles of popular books in the field of foraging and homesteading and things like that. At the time that I did my investigation, things to look out for are something Bible. That's a big giveaway that it's an AI book. X number of books in one, 7 books in one. Another big giveaway that it is not by a real person. Another thing, this author up here, Owen Tucker, not a real person. You look him up, you'll find one picture that they use for like his author bio on Amazon, and nowhere else on the entire rest of the internet. So, these are some things to look out for as you are starting to learn foraging, especially if you're looking for new books. Look for a book by a person where you can find videos of them, photos of them, articles of them, like some evidence that they are a real person that other people actually recommend. Okay, we're going to get onto the responsibility section, but Laramie, you can send me a message if there are any particular questions I should look at. I'm going to check over here to see if there are some questions before we keep on going. I think I might have started a little bit of a debate about the edibility of mushrooms eaten raw or cooked. What Blue Unicorn said, I would agree with. There's nuance to this, but what I would generally say is almost always, in almost every circumstance, mushrooms should be cooked. I basically eat, 98% of the mushroom species that I have, I eat them cooked thoroughly. I did a big video about this with morels and why that's so important. We can talk about that more at the end if you guys would like to. Okay, so responsibility. This is the other part that I really want you to have a good handle on because I want... Here's my idea. Foraging offers you a tremendous capability, a tremendous opportunity to team up with nature. It has so many incredible win-win situations that we really need to be listening for. But if we're just like going out willy-nilly, then we have the potential to cause damage. It may not be as great as some people might lead you to think. I'll talk about that a little bit more. A lot of times people think that responsible foraging is just harvesting sustainably, but I don't think so. To me, I really see it as this Venn diagram right here. So sustainable harvest is one aspect of it. We're going to look at that a lot in a second, but there's also stewardship of the land, and then also just having a sense of gratitude, which I think naturally comes to you through foraging. When we are exhibiting all of these activities, when we're doing all these things, then we are being a responsible forager. And the one that is the most technical, that requires the most focus, I would say, would be sustainable harvest. So let's look at that and the components that make up sustainable harvest. The big thing that this comes down to is what is a sustainable amount, right? And there are a lot of different takes on this. You'll hear these generalized rules like only take the third plant, only take 10% of a population, only take, so on and so on. These rules are okay, but they can't be applied across the board. For example, this is American ginseng on the left-hand side, which is a threatened plant. In my area, if I found 10 American ginseng, I wouldn't gather one from the root. I would gather them in a particular way at a particular time. I'll maybe mention that a little bit at the end if we have time. But I'm not going out of my way to like take up a whole ginseng, even if I'm only taking 10%, even if I'm only taking 5%, I wouldn't want to do that. The same cannot be said for this species above me, multiflora rose, which is an invasive species, where we don't want to take 1 out of 10, we want to take 10 out of 10 if we're in North America. And we want to take them in a way that is actually killing and removing the plant. And so one thing that we could do with this multiflora rose right here is we could gather every single last one of those petals and all of the rose hips and then cut down the plant and kill it after that. And we would be helping out our native ecology, all the native insects, all the native animals by doing so. And what do? You get wild rose hips out of it. You get wild rose petals from it where you can make rose jam. And by the way, if you've never had rose jam before, a lot of people in North America haven't. It's not a common thing in our cuisine. It is incredible. One of my favorite jams, one of my favorite flavors in the world. You guys really have to try it. Next season, when these are flowering, you want to be looking out for them. The flowering time is on my foraging calendar, which I will show you all. So what it really comes down to is gathering only what a population can easily replace. And that is going to vary from plant species to plant species based on 2 different factors, which is 1, the biology of the plant, and 2, what we're harvesting. So let me show you how those things line up. This is really important. Stick with me on this one. Okay, so like I mentioned, the first component of harvest impact is the biology of the species. We have many different ways in which plants have a reproductive strategy, the way that they spread and propagate. So here's 2 different examples right above me. The first one is ramps. This plant is particularly popular for concerns of over-harvesting and things like that, which are perhaps a bit over-exaggerated, but there is a good cause for some attention, some focus and concern here. And we have this one above me. This is Oxalis stricta, common yellow wood sorrel. Now, Oxalis stricta is an annual plant. So its strategy is it's going to come up, it's going to get the energy that it needs, it's going to produce hundreds and hundreds of seeds and die back and be done. That's it. And these are very tolerant of being harvested. It would be quite difficult to cause a negative impact to wood sorrel just by gathering it. It wouldn't be possible, I would argue. Now, with this one right here, this is an herbaceous perennial, ramps. So they are a long-lived species, and they take a long time to reach reproductive maturity, relatively speaking. So if we were to just go and start to dig up every single plant that we found, we're removing a plant that can't spread and propagate easily. So there are multiple things that we can harvest with ramps. If we take the leaves, we'll be taking a part that the plant can go without. If we took, 1 leaf per plant, things like that. But if we took the roots, then that's the whole thing, especially if we took it in a way where we are literally pulling up the whole thing and removing it. So that is something to pay attention to when you're figuring out how much you can harvest of something. Another thing that I'll mention when it comes to biology of the species, most of what I'm talking about here applies more directly to plants. With mushrooms, it's kind of a different ballgame. So mushrooms have a completely different reproductive strategy to plants. What we're looking at here with chanterelles is the fruiting body. So it's more akin to being like an apple than it is to being like a whole apple tree. When you're taking the chanterelle, it's more like picking an apple. There have been extensive studies that have been conducted over decades with chanterelles specifically on whether you harvest them or not, whether you pick them, whether you cut them, and so on and so on. And pretty much you can't do anything to harm these guys through harvest. They just don't care. They will continue to do fine. With most mushrooms, we believe that this is true as well. There might be some nuances and differences there, but overall, that is true. Okay, so component of harvest impact number 2, and I alluded to it a little bit before, is what you are gathering. There's all kinds of different parts that we can be getting from the plant. So from the roots and storage organs all the way to vegetative parts, the leaves, and then the flowers, seeds, and the fruits. So right here we see sochan, which is, again, a criminally underrated wild food. This is my favorite wild green of all time. My favorite of all time. Not my favorite salad green, that's wild lettuce, but my favorite blanched green, like a vegetable green. The flavor is absolutely incredible. You guys need to try it. And so I am cautious of how much I'm gathering with sochan. when I'm foraging for it, because I'm actually taking the leaves, the things the plant needs to get its energy, to reproduce and everything. But with the fruits of plums, that is far less of a concern. Me taking the fruits of plum, this one right here is Chickasaw plum, I am doing exactly what nature intended for me to do. The tree produces these fruits because it wants me to gather them and eat them to, effectively deposit the seed somewhere else. And so because our biological practices are a little bit further separated from nature these days, one thing that I will always do if I'm gathering the fruits of something is I will go out of my way to propagate it in some form or fashion because, in a completely natural state, that is what would be happening. So I always make sure to do that with these plants. Now, there is a lineup where we need to be the most concerned about our impact, and that is this situation right here. So this is a photo of an American ginseng root. I harvested this. The reason why I harvested this is because this site is now a parking lot. It was one of the most incredible ginseng spots that I'd ever been to. It was one of the most incredible wild plant mushroom places I'd ever been to. And a friend of mine took me there because he wanted someone else to witness how amazing it was before it's now a neighborhood. So we gathered some of these and we transplanted as many as we could. So we have a long-lived perennial, that's its biology, and the part that people are most interested in foraging for is the root. Okay? That is the lineup of the most concerning situation for a wild plant or a wild herb. That is where you're going to run into trouble with causing significant negative impacts on the population of that plant. One thing I'll say about ginseng really quick, people always talk about how it's like, foragers were these bad people that took all the ginseng. It wasn't foragers. It was an industrial herbal drug trade hiring out people who weren't foragers to go out and gather these and take them for money. This was not foraging. This was not individual foragers who were acting in their own best interest along with the best interest of nature. This was industry that did this. So I always want to mention that when talking about ginseng. So I'm going to look at the questions here for a second. Put in any questions if you have any. And we're going to move on to this one, talking about the compass. And before I do that, I'll just mention what I was talking about with ginseng before. So with ginseng, and there's an article on this from the University of Pennsylvania Extension Service, I believe. What you can do is in the fall, when the leaves turn yellow and the plant has already produced its seed and they've fallen, they must have already produced their seed. You can gather the above ground parts, not below, the above ground parts, and you are effectively removing what would be the beacon that a ginseng poacher would use to find them. If the leaves aren't present, they can't find the ginseng. It would be exceedingly difficult to find them just by digging through the dirt, right? There have been studies that have looked at the compounds in ginseng that find them in both the roots and the leaves. So an amazing thing about this is that by you doing this, you are protecting ginseng and you get to eat ginseng too. And something changes about a plant when you get to eat it. My relationship with ginseng changed when I started to eat it. I can't explain exactly what it is, but that is something that is one of the most incredible win-wins of foraging that you can possibly have. Okay, I'm going to check right here really quick. Alrighty. So people are asking about tips on finding local foraging in our own particular areas. I have an article that I wrote on my website called The Rules and Regulations of Foraging, where you can find out. So learning where foraging is allowed and what is allowed changes in every place in every way. So in that article, it'll show you how to look up your state park, how to look up your national preserve, your wildlife refuges, all these different types of public land to figure out whether you're allowed to forage there or not. In many cases, you are allowed to forage there for particular things in particular ways, but you have to look up the rules because it changes from place to place. But that article is on my website, and maybe Laramie can put that in the chat for people to check out. Okay. Let's see. Margie asks, do forage seeds need to be sown above ground? Not necessarily. With each seed, it's a different situation of what it's looking for. And we can drastically increase the germination rate and the success of wild seeds by cultivating them in particular, or not, by growing them in ways that they want to grow. That's what I've done here with these wild lettuce seeds. So it just depends on the plant. Okay, so let's talk about this. This is the fun part now. We've gotten all the prerequisites out of the way. Now we get to focus on the bits that we can use to improve ourselves as foragers, to find more wild food, to find more wild herbs, and all these incredible things. All right, so this, I kind of think of this as a compass and these different directions, and to me it starts right here, and it goes south the same way that the sun does in North America, and we go all the way around, and it's circular, right? These patterns, they feed on themselves. So we have find and identify. These are related to, before we've even gotten anything, how to know what we have and how to find what we're looking for. Once we've found them, we need to gather them and process them. I'll talk a little bit about the differences between processing and the next one, preservation. And then we have uses there as well. That's cooking things, that's making tinctures, that is making oils or making vinegars, and all the amazing ways that we can use these plants. And then we have to cultivate and steward, and how we can cultivate the wild plants that we find, and how we can be stewards of the wild. This to me is the compass of foraging. So right here, this snapshot that you're looking at right now, this is what I really want you to take away with you from this class. Because with this, you can start to think about all the different things that you want to get a better understanding of the foraging. And for each person, it's going to be different. Some people might be more interested in cultivating things. They might be more interested in growing things. Other people might really love nerding out about identifying wild plants or identifying wild mushrooms. Other people might be really into cooking. So find the thing that you really love. But I will say that there is an important piece because of the safety rules that we want to focus on first, and that's what we're going to do together. So looking at the find and identify section, here is a scenario that we need to pay attention to. Alrighty, so we have Bob on the left and we have Alice on the right. And they are both just starting off their foraging journey. Bob is a great chef. He's a fantastic chef. He loves cooking. He's a little bit bold and ambitious with the wild foods that he is consuming. Alice, she's not the best cook or anything like that. She can get by, but she's really diligent. She's good at focusing on these things and studying, and she's really into identifying things and distinguishing things. Okay, let's check in with them 5 years later and see where they are. Oh, not looking so good for Bob over there, but Alice is looking really good. So, Bob was too bold with a wild plant. He wasn't 100% confident with it, or he just kind of was a little bit flippant about it. He didn't really think about it. And he got the wrong thing, and Bob is not with us anymore, unfortunately. Alice, on the other hand, she was very diligent. She followed all the safety rules that we went through, and she's completely fine. In fact, she's better than fine. Look at all these different wild species that she's learning how to find and identify, and she's now a great chef. She's been cooking a bunch with all these things. So the saying that I always like to say, that's kind of redundant, isn't it? is if you are a good cook, but a bad identifier, then flip it. If you are a bad cook, but good at identification, you might have a bad meal, but if you are a bad identifier, but a good cook, you might have your last meal. So we'd much rather have a bad meal than our last meal. And that's why this is so important. So we're going to spend a lot of time on identification. Again, this is the principles of identification. I'm not just going to show you this is this, that is that. I'm going to show you what you need to learn and understand in order to identify things with confidence. Because it's not using identification apps. We'll talk about that in a second too. And it also is that you don't need to know how to identify everything. All right? Foraging can feel really overwhelming at first, but you don't need to know everything. So here's a great example. We have elderberry right here. Elderberry, one of my most favorite wild fruit species, one of the most abundant ones that grows in my area, and really all across eastern North America. So, Water hemlock is kind of a lookalike to elderberry, kind of. But you don't need to know how to distinguish water hemlock from elder, the plant elder, if you are foraging for the berries specifically, because the fruits of water hemlock, which are really just seeds, look nothing like these actual fleshy fruit berries with elderberry right here. So we don't need to know it in this particular circumstance. However, you should know how to identify and distinguish elderberry on the left right here from this one above me, which is devil's walking stick, because those two berries can look quite similar to each other. So with what we're identifying, we need to know how to distinguish them from other plants in that particular context of what we're foraging for, right? If we flip it, and now we're not interested in foraging for elderberries, but now we're interested in foraging for elder flowers, now we do need to know how to distinguish elder from water hemlock. Okay? So one of these is elderberry or elderflower, and the other one are water hemlock flowers. And to someone who's just starting out, they could certainly mistake them, and elder and water hemlock grow in the same environment all the time. They both like to have areas with a lot of water. The one on the left over there is water hemlock. The one right above me is elderberry. We don't have time to get into the details in this class right here, but that is in my foraging knowledge base, all those details. All right. One of the most common questions that I get asked is, what about identification apps? Can I use an identification app? Which identification app is the best? So on and so on. Here's my take on it. Identification apps are one of the best tools that you can use to assist you with identifying wild plants. But you should never, doesn't matter which one, doesn't matter how good they say they are, you should never ever rely completely on the suggestion from an identification app for something that you are actually going to consume. Please don't ever do that, okay? Strong word on suggestion. What these things are telling you, they are suggestions. They aren't truth. Only you, with your own identification skills, can determine what a plant or mushroom truly is. Only you. I use identification apps every single day. I do. iNaturalist right here is the one that I prefer. It's my favorite one. There's a whole community aspect to it that's really cool. But I'm never going to just take what iNaturalist tells me and be like, cool, it said that it's wild carrot, so I'm good to go. No, that's not ever going to happen. All right, and you shouldn't do that either. So use them to assist you to get a good guess as to what the plant might be. But then we need to go through the identification skills that we're going to learn right now. If I could, I want to tell everyone about this. This right here is the number one tool that you should become confident with if you want to build identification skills in anything. In anything. If you want to be good at identifying flowers, at identifying trees, at identifying mushrooms, at identifying lichen, at identifying bacteria. I'm sure that there's a key for it out there somewhere. Here's how they work. So they present you with a series of questions that have a yes or a no answer that lead you further down one path or another. All right? So here's a very simplified one. It's for vertebrate animals. And we have no idea what animal that we're dealing with, right? But we're just asking these questions. It's like 20 questions. Question number one is, does it have fur? And if we say yes, then we say, okay, well, then it's a mammal. And we're done for this one. And maybe we would go on to the mammal key. But if the answer is no, then we have another question. Does it have feathers? And if it's yes, then we have a bird. If not, then we move on, and so on and so on. So, we might figure out that it's a fish or that it's an amphibian right here. And these keys exist for plants and mushrooms as well. And what they're going to present you with is details that you need to know for figuring out what plant you have when you have absolutely no idea what it is. And why this is so powerful is because it's presenting you with the most important, broadest characteristics early on that you're going to really develop a strong sense for, and then the nitty-gritty details, further down the line. It's not going to open up with is the plant hairy or not, right? If we were looking at trees, because we don't even know, if we have any trees that are hairy in a particular set that we're looking at. So what we're going to learn here is what those details are, those first fundamental details that you need to know. Okay, another thing that I want to stress, again, this is kind of like a step back, it's a fundamental thing, is the importance of binary characteristics. So, I haven't talked about this so much, but I come from an engineering background, actually. If you couldn't tell from how nerdy all my videos are. And in the world of software, we have a concept of binary. And so binary is a number system where there are only two possibilities, 0 and 1. That's it. That's all that you've got. This characteristic is very important for plant identification as well. What we're looking at here is an example of a binary characteristic. We have wild carrot on the right, and we have poison hemlock on the left. The characteristic is whether or not the plant has hairs on it. So wild carrot has hairs on it. That's a 1. Yes, it does. Poison hemlock doesn't have any hairs on it. That's a 0. There is no other possibility. It either does or it doesn't. This is a good characteristic to use if we're trying to distinguish wild carrot from poison hemlock. However, if this was different, let's pretend that we're in a world where one of them was like kind of hairy, it was a little bit hairy, and the other one was really hairy. It's no longer a binary characteristic. All right? Now it's kind of existing on the spectrum where we have really hairy on one part of the spectrum and then maybe a little bit less and a little bit less on the other part. That is not something that we should try to use, especially early on, if we're trying to distinguish, especially in this case, an edible plant from a deadly one. Because if you're first starting out, like, how do you know what a little hairy is or what a lot hairy is? You need frame of references for that first. So that's why these binary characteristics are so important. Okay, so here's an example of a characteristic that isn't binary. One of the ways that we can tell apart elderberry from sumac is that elderberry leaflets typically have a finely serrated margin, and sumac leaflets have a more broadly serrated margin. That's not binary. If one of them was smooth and the other one was serrated, that would be, but this example is not. Now, for me, I can use this detail because I've seen this plant dozens of times, and I have a frame of reference for what finely serrated is and what broadly serrated is. But if I was just starting out, when I was starting out, I wasn't able to see that. I didn't have a way to, connect that to what the other plants would actually look like. But I'll tell you what is a binary characteristic to distinguish elderberry from sumac if you wanted to. Elderberry has leaves that are opposite each other, and sumac has leaves that are alternating. That's one of the most important characteristics with plants that you should know first thing. Okay, the last one that I want to cover for identification before we get into this a little bit more is the concept of failing safely. So when we're dealing, especially if we're dealing with an edible plant versus a toxic plant or a dangerous plant, we want to set ourselves up in a way that if we make a mistake, we mistake the, let me make sure I'm framing this right, we mistake the edible one for the deadly one. Does that make sense? If we ever make a mistake, we want to mistake the edible one for the deadly one. Why? Because if we do that, we're like, you know what, I'm not really sure, but I think this is the dangerous one, so I'm just going to, take a step back. I'm not going to do this at all. If we did the opposite, if we mistook the deadly one for the edible one, well, you can see why that would be a very bad situation. So with poison hemlock and wild carrot, one thing that you could run into is wild carrot has stems that are more solid on the inside, and poison hemlock has stems that are hollow. But there's a problem with that, which is why I don't recommend it to everyone starting out. If you try to cut a piece of poison hemlock that's a really young stem, it'll be hollow, but the hollowness will be really, really tiny. And to me, you could easily mistake it for being a solid stem. And I don't ever want that to happen. Not ever, right? So that's why I don't recommend that one. But if you sampled from a really large piece of the stem of poison hemlock, it would clearly be hollow. But you need to know to look for that part with it. Does that make sense? That's why it's so important, because it could set you up to mistake poison hemlock for a wild carrot, and that's the dangerous scenario. Another one, something that people talk all the time that drives me crazy, is they're like, oh, wild carrot smells like carrot. Okay, yes. But poison hemlock can smell like carrot to a degree as well. So if you've been paying attention to what we've been learning, this is red flags everywhere. For one, now it's a situation where we can fail safely, where we're like, oh, this smells like carrot, so it's carrot. Nope, big mistake. And two, that is not a binary characteristic. If one really smells strongly like carrot and the other one kind of faintly smells like carrot, not binary, right? And what is strong smelling or what is faintly smelling? That's going to be different for me and you. That's going to be different, based on your sense of smell. There are all kinds of times where you smell something and you tell your friend like, hey, this smells like this. And your friend's like, what? I don't get that at all. So aroma is highly variable, so not one that we'd ever want to rely on solely, and it's non-binary. That's not to say that aroma isn't an important identification characteristic. I use it all the time. If I know that I'm looking for something that's kind of like sassafras, then I can scratch and be like, oh yeah, this has the classic sassafras smell, and nothing else in my area that would look like what I would be looking at would have that smell. So it's something to use as a supplementary identification characteristic, but it should never ever be the sole one. All right. We're running down on our time, so I'm going to continue to give you overviews of all these things because there's going to be what I want you to have from this class is to be able to take away the things that you're like, okay, I know what I need to learn. If you saw my email about this, that's what the biggest thing was for me from some of the other teachers that have inspired me, is just like, oh, okay, they have set this up where I now know what I need to know in order to achieve what I'm trying to do. And so I'm hope that I'm able to provide that for you with the world of foraging. So if we're looking at all these leaves right here, we're like, how are we even able to sort through these? There are so many different tiny characteristics and all these different ones that can look really similar. So I have a class that I will tell you about at the end where we go through these details, where we break down every single detail that you could look for with a leaf, and we show you how to pay more attention to them and how to distinguish them from other things. But here on the left side, these are 4 details that I want you to remember with leaf characteristics. Number 1 is the leaf type, whether it's compound or simple. 2 is the leaf arrangement, whether leaves are arranged opposite, alternating, or whorl. 3 is the leaf margin, whether or not it's serrated or jagged or smooth. And then 4 is the leaf lobing, whether or not there are deep divisions in the leaf or whether or not there are not those divisions there. I know that I'm going through this really fast, but I just want to give you the overall picture so that you know what to do later on. And again, I have a complete class that goes through all of these things in way more detail. And I've got another one coming up. That's what I mentioned at the beginning of this class right here. So leaves is one part of the picture for identifying and recognizing plants. Flowers is the other one, and flowers is probably the more important one. When you learn how to recognize flowers and how to recognize the patterns of plant families, it will change the way that you see nature and plants and flowers forever. You'll be able to look at a plant that you've never seen before and say, hey, that seems like it could be a rose. That seems like it could be a brassica or a legume. I should pay close attention to that plant and learn more about it, because it could be something that I could forage for. So this class is taking place on August 29th. It'll be very similar to this one right here. And I hope to see you there. In the description, you can sign up for it. And then Laramie will probably put that in the chat as well. Laramie, it's in the description, the link for this one. So I hope to see all of you for this one as well. I'll be sure this is in the follow-up email if you are watching this later on. So here is, there were 5 families that I showed in that one before. Here are some of the big families that I think are really important for foragers to know. The carrot family, the aster or the dandelion, the sunflower family, the onion family, the bean family, rose family, blueberry family, and the brassicas, the broccoli family. All of these ones contain either many edible things or edible and deadly things with the lily family and the carrot family. But these are really important ones for you to know. And in that class, I'm going to show you how to recognize plant families, and I'm going to go through in detail each of these families and show you the really important foraging species that you should know about that comprise them. So again, this is a very quick overview, but these are the important details that you need to know about with flowers: the petal count, the stamen count, the number of pistils, and then the overall form or the shape of the flower. I'm whizzing right by that one, but this is something we're going to be looking at in detail in that class coming up on August the 29th. Danner, thank you for the $1 donation. I really appreciate that. Thank you all for being here. This has been a fantastic time. Thank you for listening to me talk about one of my favorite things in the entire world. All right, with mushrooms, things are a little bit different. We have one of the most important things to learn early on is what's called the fundamental groups of mushrooms. So mushrooms vary from mushroom to mushroom in ways that, to me, plants don't really quite as much. And so understanding how to group things with mushrooms is very important. One of the most important details with mushrooms is the spore print. And the reason why I know that's important is because if you look on keys for distinguishing mushrooms, particularly guild mushrooms, this is something that you're going to encounter, is what the color of the spore print is. Because these two mushrooms right here, they can look kind of similar. However, if we take a spore print, and by the way, one of them is edible and the other one is definitely not. If we take a spore print, one of them has a white or cream colored spore print, and the other one has a dark brown colored spore print. So what wasn't a binary detail of just their overall form, we can transform that by taking a spore print and getting a very good picture of which one is which. And then we continue on through our keys to figure out from there. Ben New, thank you for the $3 donation. I really appreciate that. All right, everyone. There is one more section that I'm going to go over. I want to cover the scouting portion of it, but once again, kind of like have a snapshot of this in your mind. This right here is your foraging compass, and I think that this is going to take you very far along your foraging journey and really allow you to not get lost while you're on your way, and to make sure that you're progressing forward in a way that keeps things exciting and keep things rewarding and fulfilling for you. So here are some things that I'll highlight that we're going to look at in a second. So the first one is with scouting. I'm going to talk about flower scouting and my interactive forager's calendar and why this is such a powerful tool. This is all in the in-depth version of this class that we don't have the time because we don't have 2 hours to go through. Other things that we talk about are different kinds of foraging products. So storage roots, these are for like various kinds of underground storage organs, but we also have herbaceous parts of plants and we also have fruiting parts of plants. And then we have, I give you an overview of all the tools that you should use for foraging. I talk about important tools for processing, and I get way into the weeds of what I call the principles of wild food processing, because from that foraging counter or from the foraging compass that we looked at before, one of my things that I love to nerd out on is wild food processing. It's one of my favorite things in the entire world. I wouldn't say I developed, but I kind of helped to create this method for processing black walnut that to me completely unlocks black walnut as a wild food in a way. Like before I saw it as this tedious task, and now I see it as a really viable, abundant wild food, and I want more people to know about this. We'll talk about all kinds of different forms of preservation. Here are things that I did with wild plums where I made them into fruit leather. I made it into a preparation called umeboshi. You can make vinegar with them. You can make sweet and sour sauce with them, and all the other kinds of different ways. Shane, thank you so much for the $10 donation. I really appreciate that. That is awesome. Thank you so much. And yes, going back to what I was talking about before, principles of wild food processing. So this wild picture that you see right here is what I'm explaining is different methods of processing and separating parts of wild food from what we want and what we don't want. This is me processing tons and tons of American persimmon, which is my favorite wild fruit in the entire world. So again, that is just a quick breeze through. In the in-depth version of this class, we go into that in a tremendous amount of detail. And if you're interested in that, it is on my Patreon page, which you can scan the QR code right here to check out if you're looking at this on your laptop and you have your phone handy, or if you're on your phone or anything, it's in the description as well if you want to check it out. So you have a 7-day free trial if you want to see like if it's right for you and if it has the things that you're looking for. And if not, then you can always cancel it at any time. And the end of the version of the class that we talked about, my foraging calendar that I mentioned, my foraging knowledge base, and a bunch of other classes are all on there for you to explore right now. So I really hope that you'll check it out. I think that there's a ton of value there for you that you're going to love, and that is going to help you out tremendously on your foraging journey. Okay, so we're going to go over the last section, which is scouting, and then I'm going to leave some time at the end here for Q&A, but this has been fantastic. So, scouting. This is important. What I'm about to share with you is very important. Perhaps one of the most undervalued skills within foraging. And what I want to talk about, this is just a brief snippet section here, is what I call flower scouting. Flower scouting is so important. If you are interested in foraging for, I'll start with elderberry. If you're interested in foraging for elderberry, you need to understand this. If you look for elderberry during the fruiting season, you are not setting yourself up for success. One, the fruiting window for elderberry can be pretty narrow. The time from when everything is looking good and all the fruit is ripe to when they're, way past and way done. I mean, that can be like a week, 2 weeks, depending on your area. So if you're looking for them and trying to find them while they're at the fruiting stage, your window is closing fast all the time. On top of that, those dark purple berries, they're kind of visible, but they aren't that visible, especially compared to this detail right here, the flowers. Elderberry has huge plumes of white flowers. During the time when elderberry is flowering, you could see elderberry from hundreds of yards away with ease. So, I don't scout for elderberry at the same time that I go foraging for elderberry. Those are two distinct times because the flowering window is the best time to be scouting for elderberry, but the fruiting window is the best time to be getting the fruits. But you can forage for both the flowers and the fruits, by the way. So that is one example. Here's another way in which flower scouting is important. Again, all of those previous things completely apply. This is pawpaw right here. So, let's see, that's Elena, I think. Am I pronouncing that correct? Elena, thank you for the $5 donation. I appreciate that. Jess P, thank you so much. I appreciate that as well. So here's pawpaw. So for one, we have that pawpaw flowers, to me, are way, way easier to find than pawpaw fruits. Pawpaw fruits are green, they're high up in the tree, and they're out there when there's a lot of other green leaves that look very similar. It can be kind of, with pawpaw, it's kind of like morels. Like, you can be looking at a pawpaw tree and thinking, like, I don't see any fruit. But then, like, they finally jump at you, you're like, oh my gosh, there's fruit right there the whole time. But when they're flowering, these dark maroon flowers are easy to spot, especially because things haven't really fully leafed out yet, so they really stand out in the forest. On top of that, one, no mosquitoes are out when pawpaw is flowering. It's very early in the season. And two, because all the vegetation hasn't really come out yet, it is so easy to walk through the forest and the woods and the edges of places to find pawpaw locations when they're flowering compared to when they're fruiting. All the vegetation is up, it's hot, there's mosquitoes out. It is not a time that you want to be looking all over the place and getting more frustrated that you can't find them. That is the time when you want to know exactly where your spots are and to beeline your way right to them. And another one that I don't have a slide for, but that I'll mention, this one's up for all of you watching. Don't go for, or how do I want to say this? The woods, right, is one of the worst places to go foraging. Closed canopy woods is one of the worst places to go foraging because everything is competing for sunlight and resources. And so things like fruits, things like nuts, things like really big vegetable species, they're not going to grow there. They don't have enough energy in order to be able to grow well in those areas. The place you want to find those is on the edges of forest, fields, open areas, things like that. If you want to find pawpaw, and you do want to find pawpaw, if you want to find it, the place to look for pawpaw is more open areas close to water. More open areas close to water. That's the most important thing to look for with pawpaw. Now, it can, like, if there's kind of like a more forested area butting up to the water, it can definitely grow there. But it really, really likes to be close to that water. I'm sure there are some ecological reasons for that, but that's the big thing with pawpaw. And you don't have to guess. You don't have to guess about when all these times they're going to flower and fruit, because both of those windows are on my interactive foragers counter that I've mentioned that you can get on my Patreon page. This tool that I built, my foragers calendar, is the thing that I wish I had when I started foraging, because I was trying to keep up with all the different things that I had to go foraging for, and I just couldn't. It was getting way too overwhelming for me. So now I'm able to look at my forager's calendar and see like, oh, it is, I think on my calendar right now it's considered midsummer. All right, what is fruiting in midsummer? What is flowering in midsummer? What do I need to be looking for right now? And what do I need to be prepared for that's coming up in the future? So I think this is an incredible resource for you. And again, you can try it out completely for free to see if the species that are on there are ones that grow in your area. And I am continually adding more and more things on there as well. So this is kind of like an idea. This is just a demo version of it. But this is generally what it looks like. And on the left, you see the cards there. And those have to do with my foraging knowledge base. So you can click on the Chickasaw plum right there, and it's going to pull up I call it your personal foraging Wikipedia for all the different things that you can do with Chickasaw plum. All right, everyone, that is everything that I had to talk about with this class. I think we ran a little bit over right here, but I'm going to leave some time for questions to answer for all of you. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope that you'll attend the next one coming up at the end of August. That is going to continue to unlock the secrets of foraging for you, and to open your eyes to all the different ways that there are to see nature and to understand nature and understand how you can work with it. So, like I said, thank you all so much. I'll stick around for a second, and I appreciate all of you who are here, who are interested in foraging, who care about foraging, who care about nature and the land. It means so much to me, and it's the best in the world. Foraging has changed my life, and I really think that it's going to do the same thing for you. Captain Drake, thank you so much for the 25 donation. I sincerely appreciate that. If only the forager's counter had 2 sections for the one insect. I'm not sure I know what that means. So I did a video on foraging for cicadas when the periodical cicadas were out. And kind of as a joke, I put the periodical cicadas on the calendar, even though it's like, once every 13 to 17 years that they would show up for you to get them. Do your courses include a way to test your knowledge? I didn't trust myself. That's a good question. I don't have those per se right now, but that's probably a good thing to work on in the future, like little flashcards for plants and things. I think that'd be great. Oh, the wild lettuce seeds. Yeah, thank you so much. I forgot. So another thing on the Patreon is that if you sign up, you can respond to a post that I have there to tell me that you want to receive some wild lettuce seeds, and I will send them to you. So I have a bunch. I've got a lot of wild lettuce seeds here, and I don't have a lot that have been spoken for so far. These things have like a very high germination rate. I have found it to be as high as 100%. 90 to 100% is not uncommon to get with wild lettuce. And I just did a video about why American wild lettuce is one of the greatest, is in my opinion the greatest wild salad green of all time, and why you should know about it and grow it and have it around you, because it's just such an incredible wild food and a wild herb. Oh, and Scrade asked, do you have any personal recommendations for a type of food processor? I use a Cuisinart one. In the link, there should be something which is like foraging tools that I use that you can find in there. Or one of the links is to a kit where you can find the one that I use. A food processor is one of the most underrated foraging tools that you can possibly get. I use it for all kinds of things. I was just using it with curly dock seeds. It worked beautifully. They're incredible. So I encourage you to get one. And I go into a lot more depth in the class, in the in-depth version of this class on my Patreon, of the different ways you can use all these different types of processing tools for wild food processing. Trisha asked, does wild lettuce tend to be invasive? They have it everywhere on their property. Yes and no. So wild lettuce is definitely an aggressively growing plant. In North America, we have a non-native species called prickly wild lettuce, Lactuca cereola, which, yes, it grows incredibly invasively. That's the one that I recommend people use to make an extract with. Um, and there's a win-win that we get there because we're taking up the whole plant to make an extract with, which is the non-native one. And so we can propagate and promote the native one, or at least in my area, the native one, American wild lettuce, which is a better salad green, but can also be used for making herbal products as well. But we can take the non-native ones because there's plenty of them, and we have no impact. We're actually helping out the native ones. Ben New asked, do plants take up pollutants into their vascular tissues? That is a great question. And the answer is kind of. So there's some, like, plants can definitely uptake heavy metals and things like that. There are studies that look at, so basically the way that I like to think about it is this, especially if you're dealing with a perennial plant. The parts that are going to be more toxic are going to be the roots, followed by, the stem, and then the leaves, and then the fruits, if they're in a situation where they're growing in a toxic environment. So that's something to consider. I definitely wouldn't be foraging for like roots or things like that close by to roads. If it's further away from a country road, honestly, I personally forage for fruits from areas like that. What I do, I think someone else was asking about this, is I always wash those things with water. Even if it's just a dust and things like that, I'm typically washing the things that I'm gathering with water, especially if I'm gathering them up off the ground. I just got a puppy, so I'm not going to be foraging for things straight off the ground in my backyard where he uses the bathroom. I always make sure to wash them. Actually, with things that he has around those areas, I'm washing them and cooking them. Making sure that he's not doing that around areas where I'm gathering my greens. So all important things to consider. Yeah, in a couple of my people have been talking about the puppy. In a couple of my videos, I have been putting in little shots of the puppy. His name is Dexter, and he is a little ball of energy. He's amazing. We really love him. My first puppy that I've had, or my first dog that I've had myself. So it's been really exciting training him and everything. And hopefully one day we'll be using him for some foraging projects. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone who has said kind things about the class. I really appreciate that. Brown Eyes asks, will there be an invite sent out for the August class? Yes, there will. So if you signed up for this class with the email, sign up and you got an email about joining, then you are on the list and you'll be sent a link to the August class as well. Radio Bedhead, thank you so much for the $5 donation. I really appreciate that. Jay Loveless, can you speak about heal all and lookalikes? I just started to do some more research on heal all Prunella vulgaris right now. Lookalikes off the top of my head would be other mints, potentially things like henbit or dead nettle and things like that. The big thing would be in my area, henbit and dead nettle, some of those other close lookalikes are going to be flowering way earlier on in the season than self-heal will. This is something that I want to start talking about a little bit more. I talked about in my new wild lettuce identification video. Timing is something that can be used as an identification characteristic. So a potential lookalike for wild lettuce, false hawksbeard, shoots up and flowers way earlier on in the season than wild lettuce does. So, it's something where you can use my Forager's calendar right here, and it'll give you an idea of like, okay, well, I'm not really looking for self-heal to be flowering in April or in March. In my area, it seems to be in more of the hotter summer months that we start to find it. Elizabeth asked, do you have any local foraging classes in the field coming up? I do. If you go on my website, I have a in-person class that's taking place on August the 3rd. I don't do a lot of in-person classes because they're kind of difficult to be able to find places for and all those and set up and everything, but I am doing one at the beginning of August. So on my website, feralforaging.com, if you go to the events page, you can find that class and sign up for it. Thanks for asking. Is Prunella vulgaris edible? I believe so. I have not eaten it yet myself, but in the research that I've done on the traditional uses of Prunella vulgaris, self-heal or heal all, I have found uses for it as a pot herb. It's a mint family member. Some of those can be a little bit strong flavoring for edible purposes, so maybe it is that way. I can't speak to its flavor myself just yet, but I have seen traditional uses of it being eaten kind of as a pot herb. Non-Danon says, we as humans are fully equipped to find the foods we need in nature. Foraging is finding that food. All wild animals do this. Yeah, I agree. One interesting thing that I have found when I started foraging is that it's like I could remember and I would relate to areas in my mind based on what was growing there. To this day, at my university, I can see this place where there was a bunch of pine trees when I was into foraging for pine pollen. I can see the oak tree that I gathered a bunch of acorns from. I can see several different oak trees that I gathered some of my first acorns from that I used for wild food. I can see the, not the autumn olive, but the silverthorn, another Elaeagnus species, and the berries that I foraged from it. And this was, over 6 years ago now. And I still vividly remember all those places. So yeah, foraging, I don't want to say it changes your brain, but it gives your brain something that it's craving for. Like, there's a lot of research that's done on how humans are built to have spatial memories, to remember, where things are on a landscape. There is a ton of research and there's a ton of examples of people using, memory palaces, which is taking advantage of that capability of ourselves. So yeah, foraging is just an opportunity to get to exercise that even more, and I think it's fantastic. Oh, sorry that you'll be out of town, Elizabeth. There should be more in the future. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. All right, if there are any last questions, then I will answer them really quick. But otherwise, oh man, it's 8:53 right here. We will end the stream, and I will see you all for the next class, I hope. That's going to be another really fantastic one. Thank you, everyone. This has been great. Y'all were a great chat. Or a great in the chat. I don't know. I'm saying that weird. Yeah, Lotta says connecting to nature, even urban area. Absolutely. Tons of urban and suburban areas around me have some of the best wild fruit around, without a doubt, because they're way more open than the forest. So you'll find better wild fruit in urban and suburban areas than you will in the middle of the woods. I guarantee it. Thank you. Thanks for the recommendation. I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. All right, everyone. I've got a lot of great videos up that I mentioned here in the class today that you can check out on my YouTube channel right now for more learning. There are tons of in-depth classes on the Patreon right there, as well as my foraging calendar. And there is way more to come always. You have all been amazing. Until next time, be feral and keep foraging. I'll see you guys later.